The night before the board meeting, Olivia Chen sat in her high-rise office, sipping iced coffee while reviewing a folder that could shatter every illusion her family ever had about her. Just 2 days earlier, her brother Brandon was bragging about a potential leadership realignment at their firm Cressmont Capital. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Olivia wasn't just another executive climbing the ladder. She owned the company they thought she barely deserved to work for. 12 years ago, while couch surfing and juggling 2 jobs, Olivia began building fintech tools that would later sell for millions. Instead of fame, she chose silence. She used that wealth to quietly acquire controlling shares of Cressmont Capital through a shell company. She watched as Brandon rode the family name to promotions while she was dismissed as the background sibling. That is, until Brandon tried to sabotage her promotion with forged emails and fraudulent claims. But Olivia came prepared. At the emergency board meeting, she walked in not as the accused, but as the chair. Calm, unshaken, she laid down the truth backed by proof power and ownership papers. Her family had bet against her. They just didn't know the game was already over. Sometimes being underestimated is your greatest advantage. 12 years ago, Olivia Chen was sleeping on a friend's couch, working 2 part-time jobs by day and teaching herself blockchain tech by night. No one saw potential in her, not her family, not her peers, and certainly not her older brother Brandon, who had always been the favored child. While Brandon was giving TEDx talks on vision and charm, Olivia was building, quietly, consistently. Her first automation platform in the crypto space sold for millions. But instead of flaunting success, she tucked it away along with 2 more silent wins that followed. She funneled her wealth through anonymous shell funds and used those to buy voting shares in Cressmont Capital, the very company where her brother worked and believed he held influence. When the board at Cressmont promoted Olivia to Chief Strategy Officer, Brandon smirked at the title, barely hiding his condescension. To him, Olivia was still the sensible sister, book-smart, maybe, but not a leader. At a family dinner, their parents chimed in with thinly veiled patronizing remarks, suggesting that perhaps Brandon could mentor her through her new responsibilities. Olivia smiled through it all, never letting on that she already held controlling interest in the company they thought Brandon was climbing. But Brandon's ego wouldn't let her exist peacefully in a position he believed belonged to him. He whispered to executives that Olivia was burned out, fabricated HR concerns, and ultimately compiled a dossier of forged documents, fake wire transfers, and manipulated data intended to ruin her reputation and derail her career. He sent it directly to the board under the cover of confidential concern. What he didn't know, Olivia had already seen the folder. She had already compiled her own dossier, this one filled with voice recordings, emails, and documents proving his deception. At the emergency board meeting meant to review these concerns, Olivia arrived at 9:00 a.m., sharp not as a defendant, but as the owner. She calmly took the head seat at the table and revealed the truth. Cressmont Capital was no longer publicly held. It had been quietly acquired by Archspire Group LLC, which she owned outright. The board's eyes widened as Olivia laid out the evidence, including Brandon's own voice, dismissing her as a diversity win and accusing her of lacking leadership. His confidence melted in real time. When her parents tried to defend him, calling for understanding and mercy, Olivia remained steady. Family doesn't erase your wins. Family doesn't sabotage your future out of envy, she said firmly. She requested the board not only dismiss all allegations, but also immediately terminate Brandon and report his misconduct to the appropriate licensing authorities. Her final request, that Brandon and their parents be permanently banned from company property. Olivia's power wasn't about vengeance. It was about truth and ownership of her work, her value, and finally, her voice. She didn't rise by being the loudest in the room. She rose by building quietly, proving consistently, and refusing to be dismissed. In the end, Brandon's empire of ego crumbled under the weight of Olivia's integrity, and she was just getting started. They always assumed I was the background character in our family, the dependable one, the overachiever who lacked charisma, the one who chose spreadsheets over spotlight. At every family gathering, Brandon, my brother, held court. Slick suit, polished charm, empty business jargon delivered with flair. Me, I was just Rachel Reliable too, serious, never quite dazzling enough. That perception was convenient for them, and I let them keep it until they tried to destroy me. When I was quietly promoted to Chief Strategy Officer at Crestmont Capital, Brandon's reaction was instantaneous. He chuckled at dinner wine, swirling in his glass, making comments about how strategy is a different beast and how I should let him mentor me. My parents predictably nodded along. They didn't know that just weeks earlier, I had finalized the silent acquisition of Crestmont's voting shares through Archspire Group LLC, my own holding company. They didn't know I now owned Crestmont outright, but Brandon couldn't tolerate seeing me rise. Soon whispers began trickling through HR. Baseless concerns about my credentials, rumors about burnout, even forged award claims. I kept my head down all the while collecting evidence. It wasn't anger driving me, it was clarity. The same clarity I'd had 12 years ago sleeping on a friend's couch while building my first crypto automation tool that later sold for 8 figures. I had always built my life on substance, not show, and this was no different. Then came the breaking point, a glossy black folder sent anonymously to the board. Inside, Brandon had included doctored bank statements, fabricated wire transfers, and accusations of fraud. It was a calculated move designed to create just enough doubt to force the board's hand. What he didn't count on was that I'd already seen it. In fact, I had sent my own folder to the board just hours earlier, containing not only a rebuttal of his false evidence, but a full ownership ledger, voice recordings, emails, and a timeline of his sabotage. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. sharp. Brandon showed up in his most expensive blazer, flanked by my parents smirking like a man convinced he was walking into a coronation. I watched from my corner office window as they were ushered into the boardroom. Calm, unshaken, I took my time walking down the hall and entered the room at exactly 9:00. Brandon was already speaking. He froze when he saw me. "This is a closed session," he snapped. I smiled. "Not when the company's principal owner is present." The silence that followed was profound. I laid everything on the table, proof of my ownership. His recordings slandering me, the forged documents, the lies. The board listened without interruption. When I finished, I stood and requested that all false allegations against me be dismissed, that Brandon be immediately terminated, and that his misconduct be reported to every licensing and professional authority he was affiliated with. I added one more thing, a permanent ban of Brandon and my parents from Crestmont Capital's premises. My mother whispered, "We're still family." But I looked her in the eye and said, "Family doesn't try to erase your wins. Family doesn't root for you to fail." As they were escorted out, Brandon turned, tears welling. "I was jealous," he said quietly. "You were finally winning, and I couldn't take it." I replied softly, "When I was down, you pushed me lower. When I was rising, I stayed silent, so you wouldn't feel small. That's the difference." He left with nothing. I stayed with everything I built. In the months that followed, Crestmont flourished under my leadership, expanded into new sectors, launched funds to support overlooked founders, and became a case study in quiet, ethical growth. Brandon sent a letter months later, no excuses, just acknowledgement. You succeeded in spite of us. I'm finally learning how to build for real. For once, his words didn't feel like manipulation. They felt like peace. They never saw me coming, not because I was hiding, but because they never looked beyond the surface. For years, my brother Brandon was the family's shining star. Big smiles, smooth talk, flashy ideas that rarely landed. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one. Rachel, the one who worked late, skipped parties, and took things too seriously. But I didn't mind. They underestimated me, and I used every moment of that dismissal to build something real. The turning point came when I was promoted to Chief Strategy Officer at Crestmont Capital. It should have been a moment of celebration, but instead, I got side comments. Brandon laughed over family dinner, calling it cute, and suggesting I let him mentor me because real strategy deals with real money. My parents nodded, completely missing the irony. They had no idea I had just finalized the acquisition of Crestmont's controlling interest through a shell fund I created years earlier. They didn't know the board had approved me, not just as CSO, but as Crestmont's new majority owner. But Brandon couldn't let it go. First came whispers to HR soft suggestions that I wasn't emotionally stable enough, that maybe I had padded my resume. Then came a slick black folder sent anonymously to the board, fake wire transfers, doctored reports, claims of misconduct. A coordinated attack meant to smear my name and push me out. He thought it would work. He thought no one would question the golden sun. What he didn't know was that I had already sent my own folder to the board, containing every lie he had told, every falsified document, every whisper he'd seeded. I had call logs, emails, even recordings. But more importantly, I had proof of ownership. The board meeting was set for 9 a.m. sharp. Brandon arrived in full swagger-pressed suit, confident smirk, our parents trailing behind like it was his coronation. They didn't know they were walking into the most important undoing of his life. At 9:00, I entered the boardroom calm and steady. Brandon tried to stop me, claiming it was a closed session. I smiled. Then it's a good thing I'm the company's principal owner. The room shifted. I handed out documentation confirming the acquisition. Then I played recordings, Brandon referring to me as a diversity hire and bragging that I didn't have the spine for leadership. I laid out every piece of forged evidence he had submitted, exposing his fraud in real time. No one said a word. There was nothing left to defend. When the board chair asked what actions I recommended, I kept it simple. Dismiss all false allegations against me. Terminate Brandon immediately for misconduct. File reports with every licensing board he was associated with. Ban him and our parents from all Crestmont properties permanently. My mom cried. My dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in a minute. But I didn't waver. Family doesn't try to erase you, I told them. Family doesn't root for you to fail. I ended the meeting by handing over one final document, proof of the $50 million I'd earned at 27 from my first fintech sale, the $180 million I earned later. I looked my father in the eye and said, I could have bought you every golf club and covered all of Brandon's failures, but I didn't. I needed to know who stood with me when they thought I had nothing. They didn't say a word, and I didn't need them to. Weeks later, Brandon showed up at my office, not with excuses, but with a folder, a full confession. I'm starting over, he said quietly. No fake titles. I want to earn something this time. I didn't smile, but I didn't shut the door either. Send me your resume in a year, I said. Not for leadership, but if you're serious, there's always room for someone willing to build the right way. That day, I realized something. True power isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about building something no one can take away. And when the dust settles, it's not the applause that matters, it's the legacy you leave behind. They tried to erase me from my own future, but I rewrote the ending. Growing up, I was never the loud one. My brother Brandon, he was the golden boy. Every dinner, every reunion, every conversation somehow circled back to his latest vision. It didn't matter that most of his businesses fizzled out before tax season. He had the charm, and charm carried weight in our family. Me, I was the quiet one. Rachel, the overachiever, the one who stayed late, worked weekends, asked questions no one liked hearing. They thought I was just another overeducated tag-along. But while they were busy performing, I was building. For years, I quietly taught myself blockchain technology. I created and sold fintech tools under anonymous LLCs. Every profit was reinvested into shell companies and strategic assets, one of which, 6 months ago, became the majority shareholder of Crestmont Capital, the company my brother and parents thought I was lucky just to work at. They didn't know I owned it, not until it was too late. When the board promoted me to Chief Strategy Officer, I didn't correct them at dinner when they called it a nice opportunity or suggested Brandon mentor me. I didn't flinch when Brandon told me that real strategy involved real money, not pretty slides. I just nodded, smiled, waited. But Brandon couldn't help himself. He started planting doubts with HR, fake rumors, whispered questions about my credentials. He forged statements and even sent a folder of fake documents to the board claiming I'd committed fraud. What he didn't know was that I had everything, his emails, his calls, even recordings. I compiled every lie, every smear, every slip-up into a single midnight dossier. Then came the board meeting. Brandon strutted in like a savior. My parents followed proud and expectant. He thought he was taking me down. Instead, he walked into the biggest reckoning of his life. I stepped in and took my seat at the head of the table. "This is a closed session," he snapped. "No," I said calmly. "It's a board meeting, and as Crestmont's majority owner, I think I belong here." I presented the truth. I exposed every attempt he made to destroy my career, played his own words from private recordings, showed the board the forged documents he tried to pass off as fact. Then I handed them the paperwork proof of the buyout, the acquisition, my ownership. My parents sat in stunned silence. Brandon's face went pale, and I said it clearly. This wasn't just an attack on me. It was an attack on Crestmont's integrity. I requested formal action, full exoneration of all claims, immediate termination of Brandon for gross misconduct, reporting to the appropriate regulatory boards, a permanent ban from all Crestmont properties for Brandon and for both my parents. They tried to protest. "We're family," my mother cried. I looked her in the eyes and said, "Family doesn't root for you to fail." Then I showed them what they never knew, the $50 million I earned by 27, the $180 million from my second venture. I stayed quiet, I said, because I needed to know who saw me when they thought I had nothing. They had failed that test. Brandon was removed within days. My story made waves across the financial world. Suddenly, I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was the woman who rewrote the rules. And when Brandon showed up months later, quietly offering a folder of everything he had done, owning it no spin, I finally saw something different in him. "I'm starting over," he said. I didn't forgive him that day, but I gave him a path. "Send me your resume in a year," I told him. "Not for leadership, but we hire people willing to earn their way, because I believe in second chances, just not unearned ones. The power wasn't in the takedown. It was in the rebuild, in showing up and standing tall, in owning what I had created without needing applause. Because real success doesn't scream, it just keeps building. They thought silencing me would keep their image intact. They didn't realize I held the blueprint to the entire company's future. The day I walked into the boardroom at Crestmont Capital, Everything changed, not just for me, but for the legacy of a family who had spent years pretending I didn't belong. For too long, I had played the quiet one, the overlooked one. My brother Brandon had always been the charismatic risk-taker, the one who made headlines and messes in equal measure. My parents. They cheered him on, even as his business ventures collapsed one by one. I, Rachel, was the sensible one, a backhanded compliment that usually came with a shoulder shrug or a dismissive laugh. But what they didn't know was that I had spent the last decade building a financial empire behind the scenes. While Brandon was giving flashy TED-style talks about disruption, I was coding late at night, selling fintech platforms under anonymous LLCs, and investing quietly through a shell fund. By the time I was 29, I had enough capital to begin acquiring voting shares in Crestmont Capital, the very company Brandon bragged about being part of. 6 months before the board meeting, I finalized my acquisition and became the majority stakeholder through Archspire Group, LLC. No press release, no name on the door. I let them keep believing I was just lucky to be promoted to Chief Strategy Officer. And when Brandon launched his campaign to take me down with forged wire transfers, fake HR complaints, and whispered lies, I let him think it was working. But I wasn't being passive. I was documenting. Every doctored file, every manipulated statement, every backdoor phone call he made, I collected it all down to timestamps and audio recordings. When he smugly told our parents over dinner that realignment was coming and that I should be mentored, I nodded politely and smiled. He didn't know the board had already received my midnight dossier. At the board meeting, I walked in as he was midway through presenting his concerns about my leadership. He barely looked at me, certain that I was about to be replaced. "Rachel, this is a closed session," he said, like I was an intern who wandered in. "No," I replied evenly. "It's a board meeting. And as Crestmont's principal owner, I believe I'm expected to attend." Silence. I watched his face collapse in real time. The other board members shifted uncomfortably as my assistant distributed updated ownership records. Then I played the recordings, his voice dripping with arrogance, calling me a diversity win, a placeholder, someone too soft to lead. I showed them the forged documents and walked them through every manipulation. Then I made my requests immediate clearance of all charges, formal disciplinary action, and a ban on Brandon and our parents from all Crestmont properties. I even included a recommendation to notify Brandon's licensing board for professional misconduct. My mother's voice cracked. "But we're still family." "No," I said. "Family doesn't try to destroy what you've built in silence." I showed them the receipts, $50 million at 27, $180 million by 30. Not gifted, not inherited, earned. I stayed quiet, I told them, because I needed to know who stood by me when you thought I had nothing. You all failed that test. Brandon was terminated. The financial world shifted. For the first time, networks asked about me, not as Brandon's sister, but as the architect of a rising empire. I launched mentorship programs for women in fintech. We expanded into new sectors. And while my parents still send messages, I've learned the difference between proximity and support. Brandon came back once, no suit, no swagger, just honesty. "I was imitating what you built," he said. "You made it real." I didn't promise him anything, but I told him, "Send me your resume in a year, not for a leadership role, but if you're ready to earn it from the ground up, we'll talk." Because redemption isn't about erasing mistakes, it's about what you build afterward, and this time, the blueprint is mine. They tried to erase me from my own story, but I was the one holding the pen the entire time. After years of being labeled the quiet one, the safe daughter who lacked spark, I finally stepped into a room meant to betray me and claimed it as mine. My family thought they could block my career, not realizing I owned the very company they were scheming in. I didn't raise my voice. I raised evidence. I didn't seek revenge. I delivered truth. And when it came time to choose between silence or dignity, I chose to lead with clarity. Life lesson. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is not proving others wrong, but proving yourself right. Being underestimated isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your rise. You don't have to shout to lead. You don't have to beg to belong. And you never ever have to shrink so someone else feels bigger. True power isn't loud. It's earned in quiet resilience, in late nights building, in staying the course when no one claps. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever been dismissed, doubted or told, you're not enough, leave a comment below. Tell me what part hit home. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about quiet strength, earned respect, and building something real on your own terms.